I discovered my wife's secret family, and I'm not even her real husband. They say you never truly know a person. I thought I knew my wife better than anyone. We'd spent 15 years building a life together, a home filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the quiet comfort of a love that had weathered a decade and a half. I could tell you how she takes her coffee, the specific way she furrows her brow when she's concentrating, and the sound of her laugh from the other room. I thought our story was written, bound in the leather of our wedding albums, and sealed with the promise of "till death do us part." I was wrong. Our story wasn't written in ink, it was written in smoke, ready to disappear with the slightest breeze. And it all started with a simple chore, a trip to the attic, and a dusty box that held the explosive truth. My entire life, my marriage, my very identity was all a lie. And I was about to find out I wasn't the only one living it. It was one of those sweltering Saturday afternoons in late July, where the air feels thick enough to swim in. The kind of day that begs for inertia, for the cool hum of an air conditioner and the mindless distraction of a streaming service. But Jessica, my wife, had other plans. The attic, she declared, was a black hole of forgotten things, and its time had come. I grumbled, of course, offering a half-hearted protest about the heat, but I knew it was a losing battle. Jessica's organizational frenzies were a force of nature, and I was merely the landscape they reshaped. So, up the pull-down stairs I went, into the stifling, dusty kingdom of our home's forgotten history. The attic was exactly as I'd left it, a chaotic museum of our life together. Stacks of old college textbooks yellowing in a corner, a crib neither of us could bear to throw away, and boxes labeled with a Sharpie that had long since faded into illegibility. I started with the box closest to the hatch, labeled Memories. It was filled with the usual suspects: photo albums from our early dating years, a bundle of letters we'd written to each other when I'd spent a summer interning across the country, and a small velvet box containing the first piece of jewelry I'd ever given her, a silver necklace with a tiny star pendant. It was all so familiar, so comforting. I was smiling, lost in a warm haze of nostalgia, when my hand brushed against something else tucked away in the corner of the box, beneath a stack of old yearbooks. It was a large, yellowed envelope, heavy and stiff with age. There was no writing on the outside, no clue as to its contents. My curiosity piqued. I slid the contents out. It was a sheaf of legal documents, bound together with a rusty paperclip. The first page was a petition for dissolution of marriage. My heart did a strange little flip-flop, a confused flutter. Divorce papers? But we'd never even discussed it, not seriously. We'd had our rough patches, sure, like any couple, but nothing that ever felt terminal. I scanned the document, looking for a name, a date, anything that would make sense of this bizarre artifact. And then I saw it. The name of the petitioner, Jessica Ann Bennett. Her maiden name. And the name of the respondent, Michael Miller. A name I didn't recognize. But it was the date at the top of the document that made the blood run cold in my veins. It was dated 15 years and 3 months ago. I did the math in my head, my thoughts sluggish with disbelief. 15 years and 3 months ago. That was a month before Jessica and I had our small civil ceremony at the courthouse. A year before our big wedding with all our friends and family. My eyes darted back to the names, Jessica Bennett and Michael Miller. Who the hell was Michael Miller? I flipped through the pages, my hands trembling slightly. There were financial disclosures, asset listings, all the mundane trappings of a marriage ending. And then I got to the last page, the signature page. There, in Jessica's familiar, elegant script, was her signature. Next to it, a date. But the space for the respondent's signature, for Michael Miller, was empty. Below that, the space for the clerk's signature and the official court seal was also conspicuously, unnervingly blank. These weren't just divorce papers, they were unfiled divorce papers. Jessica had started the process of divorcing this Michael Miller person, had signed the documents herself, but then nothing. She'd never finished. She'd never filed them. The implications of this single, monumental fact began to dawn on me, slowly at first, then with the terrifying, unstoppable force of a tidal wave. If she was still legally married to Michael Miller when she married me, then our marriage wasn't just troubled, it wasn't just a lie, it was legally, completely, and utterly void. I wasn't her husband. I had never been her husband. I was just a man living with a woman who was already married to someone else, a ghost in a life that wasn't even real. I sat there in the dusty silence of the attic, the unfiled divorce papers clutched in my hand, and felt the entire foundation of my world crack wide open. The question wasn't just who Michael Miller was. The question was, what else about the last 15 years was a complete and total fabrication? The world didn't stop. The sun didn't fall from the sky. Downstairs, I could hear the gentle whir of the washing machine starting up, a sound so normal, so domestic, it felt like a personal insult. My life had just been systematically dismantled by a few pieces of paper, yet the mundane rhythm of the household continued on, oblivious. I carefully placed the divorce papers back into the yellow envelope, my mind a chaotic storm of questions. Who was Michael Miller? Why did Jessica have these papers? And the most terrifying question of all, was he still a part of her life? I felt a desperate, primal need to know, to understand the architecture of the lie I'd been living in. I descended the attic stairs, my body moving on autopilot. Jessica was in the living room, arranging fresh flowers in a vase, a picture of serene domesticity. She looked up and smiled, that same warm, genuine smile I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "Find anything good up there?" she asked, her voice light and airy. The casualness of her question was a dagger to my heart. How could she stand there smiling while I was carrying the explosive remnants of a secret life? I mumbled something about old yearbooks and retreated to my home office, closing the door behind me. I needed to think. I needed to investigate. My mind raced, replaying the beginning of our relationship. We'd met at a friend's party, a whirlwind romance that had felt faded, almost magical. She told me she was just out of a long-term relationship that had ended badly, but she was ready to move on. I'd never pressed for details, respecting her privacy. Now, that privacy felt like a carefully constructed wall. I remembered our courthouse wedding. It had been her idea, she'd said, wanting to make it official before we planned the big ceremony for our families. It had felt romantic, spontaneous. Now, it felt like a legal maneuver, a desperate attempt to legitimize something that was, from the very beginning, built on a foundation of fraud. I turned to my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. My first stop was social media. I searched for Michael Miller, but the name was too common, a digital ocean of faces I didn't know. I needed more information. I went back to the mental image of the divorce papers. Was there an address? A middle initial? I couldn't remember. My brain was too foggy with shock. I needed to see them again, but I couldn't risk going back to the attic. Instead, I started digging through our digital archives, our shared cloud storage, looking for any clue, any anomaly. I spent hours sifting through years of photos, documents, and old emails, my eyes burning from the strain of staring at the screen. Just as I was about to give up, a ghost from the past appeared. I found an old, archived email account of Jessica's, one she'd used in college and hadn't touched in years. I didn't know the password, but I did know her security questions. The name of her first pet? Buster. The street she grew up on? Elmwood. I was in. The inbox was a time capsule filled with emails from old friends and professors. I started a search for Michael. My heart hammered against my ribs with every click of the mouse. And then, there it was, an old email chain, over a decade old. The subject line was simply, "Us." I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. It was a conversation between Jessica and a Michael Miller. The content was intimate, filled with inside jokes and shared memories. It was clearly a long-term, serious relationship. But it was the last email in the chain that sent a chill down my spine. It was from Jessica, sent just a few weeks before we met. It read, "Michael, I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving. I'm filing the papers. Please, don't try to find me. I need a clean start." A clean start? That's what she wanted, with me. But she hadn't gotten a clean start, had she? She'd just started a new lie on top of the old one. I kept digging, my hands shaking. I clicked on an old folder in her email attachments, one labeled DC Trip. It was a photo album from a vacation she'd taken with college friends, or so she'd told me. The first photo loaded. It was Jessica, younger, with a brighter, more carefree smile. And standing next to her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, was a man. He was tall, with dark hair and a familiar, easygoing smile. I didn't need to check the file name to know who it was. It was Michael Miller. And as I scrolled through the photos, a sickening realization began to form. This wasn't just an old boyfriend. This was a life she had lived, a life she had chosen to walk away from, or so she said. But the divorce papers told a different story. She had tried to leave, but had she ever truly let go? My eyes scanned the background of the photos, looking for any other detail, any other clue. And in one photo, taken in front of the Lincoln Memorial, I saw it. On the t-shirt of a stranger walking by in the background, a logo for a tech company. A company I recognized. A company that, I would soon discover, was headquartered in Portland, Oregon, 3 states away. The logo on the t-shirt was a fluke, a random piece of data in a sea of digital noise. But it was a thread, and in my current state of mind, any thread was worth pulling. The company was Nexus Tech, a mid-sized software firm I knew from industry news. They were based in Portland, Oregon. Portland, a city Jessica had visited frequently over the years, always for a plausible reason. A conference for her marketing firm, a bachelorette party for an old college friend, a solo trip to find herself after a particularly stressful quarter at work. Each trip had been a blip on our shared calendar, a few days of absence that I'd barely registered. Now they felt like glaring, screaming red flags. My investigation shifted into high gear. I became a man possessed, a digital detective working the most important case of my life. I started with Nexus Tech. A quick search on LinkedIn brought up dozens of employees, but I refined my search, adding Michael Miller and the Portland area. And there he was, Michael Miller, Senior Project Manager at Nexus Tech. His profile picture was a professional headshot, but it was undoubtedly the same man from the photos in Jessica's old email account. The face was a little older, a few lines etched around the eyes, but the smile was the same. My heart pounded in my chest as I clicked on his profile. It was set to private, of course, but LinkedIn often reveals a few public details. And what I saw made my stomach drop. His start date at Nexus Tech was 14 years ago. He'd been with the company for almost the entirety of my marriage to Jessica. The coincidences were piling up, becoming too numerous to ignore. A man named Michael Miller, who Jessica had once been in a relationship with, worked at a company in a city she visited regularly. The unfiled divorce papers? The timeline was a perfect, horrifying storm. But I still needed more. I needed definitive proof that this wasn't just a series of tragic coincidences. I needed to connect Jessica to this Michael Miller, not just in the past, but in the present. I spent the next few days in a haze, going through the motions of my life, while my mind was 1,000 miles away, in Portland. I'd sit across from Jessica at dinner, nodding along as she talked about her day, my mind replaying the image of Michael Miller's LinkedIn profile. I felt like a character in a play, reciting lines I no longer believed in. The woman sitting across from me was a stranger, a beautifully constructed facade hiding a secret so profound it threatened to swallow me whole. I started looking for other clues, anything that could connect her to Portland, to him. I checked our shared finances, looking for credit card charges from Portland-based businesses. I scoured old social media posts, looking for check-ins or tags I might have missed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a community newsletter for a suburban neighborhood just outside Portland. I had been Googling variations of Michael Miller and Nexus Tech for hours, and a link to a PDF file popped up. It was a welcome to the neighborhood feature from a few years back. The article profiled new families who had moved into the area. And there, in a smiling, candid photo taken at a local park, was Michael Miller. He was with a woman, her back partially to the camera, pushing a little boy on a swing. The caption read, "We'd like to give a warm welcome to Michael Miller, his wife Jessica, and their 2 children. Ethan and Olivia, who recently moved into the area. Michael is a senior project manager at Nexus Tech, and Jessica is a freelance marketing consultant. We're so happy to have you in the community." Wife. Jessica. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at the photo, my eyes refusing to believe what they were seeing. The woman's face wasn't clear, but I knew it was her. The way she stood, the curve of her neck, the color of her hair. It was Jessica, and she had 2 children with this man, Ethan and Olivia. My mind reeled, trying to process the impossible, the surreal. She wasn't just married to him in the past, she was still married to him. They had built a life together, a family. While I was building a life with her, she was building another one with him. The business trips to Portland weren't for conferences. They were trips home, to her real husband, to her real children. The divorce papers in the attic weren't a relic of a failed relationship. They were the cornerstone of an elaborate, monstrous double life. I wasn't just a man who had been deceived. I was a placeholder, a prop in someone else's story. And as I sat there, staring at the smiling faces of the family I never knew I was sharing my wife with, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. I had to know everything. The world had become a silent movie. I'd watched Jessica move through our home, her actions now imbued with a sinister double meaning. The way she'd kiss me goodbye in the morning felt like a performance. The phone calls she'd taken another room, her voice lowered to a conspiratorial whisper, were no longer just work-related. They were secret conversations with her other life. I was living in a house of mirrors, every reflection a distorted version of the truth. The knowledge of her other family, of Michael and the 2 children, Ethan and Olivia, was a constant, gnawing presence in my mind. It was a tumor of the soul, growing with every passing hour. I became a master of subterfuge, a spy in my own home. I'd wait until she was in the shower to check her phone, my heart pounding with a mixture of guilt and adrenaline. I'd rifle through her purse when she was out, not looking for anything specific, but for any clue, any scrap of evidence that could fill in the gaping holes in her story. I felt dirty, violated my own privacy and hers, but the compulsion was too strong to resist. I had to know. I had to see the shape of the lie. One evening, while she was at her weekly yoga class, I found it. It was a small, crumpled receipt from a coffee shop, tucked into the side pocket of her handbag. The name of the shop was The Daily Grind, and the address was on a street in Portland. The date was from just last week. She had been there. She had been in her other city, in her other life, just a few days ago. A wave of nausea washed over me. I could picture her there, sitting in a cozy coffee shop, laughing, perhaps with Michael, or maybe with one of her Portland friends, completely detached from the life she had with me. I turned the receipt over, and that's when I saw it. Scrawled on the back in her familiar, loopy handwriting was a list. A shopping list, or so it seemed at first glance. Milk, eggs, bread. But then below it were 3 more items, each one a dagger to my heart. Ethan's soccer, Olivia's ballet, and Michael's anniversary. Seeing their names written in her hand, alongside the mundane task of buying milk, was more intimate, more real than any photo could have been. It was the ultimate proof. This wasn't just a secret she kept, it was a life she actively managed, a family she cared for, a husband she loved enough to remember his anniversary. The list was a bridge between her 2 worlds, a tiny piece of paper that contained the entirety of her deception. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the receipt clutched in my hand, the paper damp with my sweat. The abstract horror of her secret family had now become a concrete, tangible reality. These weren't just names in a newsletter, they were people with schedules and needs and anniversaries. They were her priority. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. I'd look at Jessica and see 2 different people. There was the woman I loved, the woman who knew my favorite song and could make me laugh like no one else. And then there was the stranger, the master manipulator who had orchestrated a 15-year-long deception. I started replaying every conversation, every memory, looking for the cracks in her performance. I remembered the time she'd come back from a conference in Portland, looking tired but happy. It was productive, she'd said, but I missed you like crazy. Now, I knew she was probably coming home from a weekend with her children. The lie was so complete, so absolute. It was a work of art, a monstrous, heartbreaking work of art. I knew I couldn't go on like this. The silent surveillance, the constant anxiety, the feeling of being a ghost in my own life, it was tearing me apart. I had to make a choice. I could walk away, disappear into the night, and leave her to her tangled web of lies. Or I could confront her. I could force her to look at me, to see the damage she had done. The thought of confronting her was terrifying. What would she say? Would she deny it? Would she break down and confess? Or would she try to manipulate me, to twist the situation until I was the one at fault? I didn't know, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't live with the secret anymore. The receipt, the list, it was my smoking gun. It was time to load the chamber. The decision to confront her was not a sudden, dramatic choice, but a slow, dawning realization that I was drowning. The secret was a weight I could no longer carry. I spent the day planning, not what I would say, but how I would present the evidence. I wanted to watch her face, to see the truth in her eyes before a single word was spoken. I laid the artifacts of her double life out on the coffee table in the living room, like a detective presenting his case. The yellowed envelope containing the unfiled divorce papers, a printed photo of her and Michael from the community newsletter, and the receipt from the Portland coffee shop, the list of her other family's chores facing up. It was a silent, damning indictment of a life lived in shadow. I waited. The minutes stretched into hours, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against my nerves. I sat in the armchair opposite the coffee table, a silent judge awaiting the defendant. Finally, I heard the key in the lock. The front door opened and Jessica walked in, her arms full of groceries. She was humming a tune, a cheerful, upbeat melody that felt like a violation of the somber, charged atmosphere in the room. "Honey, I'm home," she called out, her voice echoing in the unnaturally quiet house. She walked into the living room, and her smile faltered. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene, me sitting motionless in the armchair, the strange collection of documents on the coffee table, the yellowed envelope containing the unfiled divorce papers, a printed photo of her and Michael from the community newsletter, and the receipt from the Portland coffee shop, the list of her other family's chores facing up. It was a silent, damning indictment of a life lived in shadow. I waited. The minutes stretched into hours, each tick of the clock a hammer blow against my nerves. I sat in the armchair opposite the coffee table, a silent judge awaiting the defendant. Finally, I heard the key in the lock. The front door opened, and Jessica walked in, her arms full of groceries. She was humming a tune, a cheerful, upbeat melody that felt like a violation of the somber, charged atmosphere in the room. "Honey, I'm home," she called out, her voice echoing in the unnaturally quiet house. She walked into the living room, and her smile faltered. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene, me sitting motionless in the armchair, the strange collection of documents on the coffee table. The humming stopped. The grocery bag slipped from her grasp, a carton of eggs cracking on the hardwood floor with a sickening splat. She didn't look at the mess. Her eyes were fixed on the table, on the envelope with her maiden name on it. The color drained from her face, leaving it a pale, waxy mask. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She took a hesitant step forward, her eyes flicking from the divorce papers to the photo of her and Michael to the crumpled receipt. I watched her, my own heart a cold, heavy stone in my chest. I saw the dawning recognition in her eyes, the slow, horrifying realization that her two worlds had just collided right here in our living room. She looked from the table to me, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it was almost a relief. She knew. She knew that I knew. The silence that followed was the most deafening sound I had ever experienced. It was a thick, suffocating blanket woven with 15 years of lies. I didn't have to say a word. The evidence on the table screamed the truth for me. I watched as she went through the stages of grief right there in front of me. First, denial. A slight shake of her head, as if she could physically dislodge the reality of the situation. Then, bargaining. Her eyes pleaded with me, a silent, desperate prayer for this all to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. But as her gaze fell upon the receipt, upon the list of her children's names in her own handwriting, the bargaining gave way to a crushing, absolute despair. Her shoulders slumped, and she sank onto the edge of the sofa, her body racked with a silent, shuddering sob. I wanted to feel anger, to rage at her, to shake her, and demand an explanation for the monumental betrayal. But as I watched her crumble, all I felt was a profound, hollow sadness. The woman I loved was gone, and in her place was this broken, terrified stranger. I saw the entire story in her face, the narrative of a young woman who had made a terrible, cowardly choice, and then spent 15 years digging herself deeper and deeper into a hole of her own making. She hadn't meant for this to happen, I realized. She hadn't set out to hurt me or Michael or anyone. She had just been afraid. Afraid of the fallout, afraid of the truth, afraid of being alone. And so she had chosen the path of least resistance, living two lives, loving two men, and in the end, truly belonging to neither. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen with tears. The silence was finally broken, but the words that came out of her mouth were not the apology I had expected, not the desperate plea for forgiveness I had anticipated. They were something else entirely, something so selfish, so manipulative, it shattered the last remaining fragment of my love for her. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, a raw, desperate plea. "Which one are you going to tell?" The question hung in the air between us, a testament to her utter and complete self-absorption. She wasn't sorry for what she had done. She was sorry she had been caught. And her only concern was damage control. Her question, "Which one are you going to tell?" was a key turning a lock I hadn't even known was there. It opened a door inside me, and behind it was not rage, not sorrow, but a cold, clear, and absolute certainty. It was over. The woman I had spent the last 15 years loving, the woman I had built a life with, had just revealed herself to be a stranger, a master manipulator whose only concern in the face of her world collapsing was how to manage the fallout. There was no apology in her question, no remorse for the pain she had caused me, or I could only assume for the pain she would cause Michael and her children. There was only fear, fear of exposure. I didn't answer her. I just stood up, walked to the door, and left. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be in that house, in that suffocating atmosphere of lies and desperation for another second. I got in my car and drove. The city lights a blur through my tear-filled eyes. I drove for hours aimlessly, the engine's hum a soothing balm to my fractured mind. I wasn't running away. I was running towards something. The truth, my own truth, a life that wasn't built on a foundation of sand. The next few days were a blur of legal consultations and painful realizations. I met with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to my story with a stoic expression that barely masked her shock. I laid out the entire sordid tale. The unfiled divorce papers, the secret family in Portland, the receipt, the list. When I was finished, she was silent for a long moment, tapping her pen on her legal pad. "This is unprecedented," she finally said, her voice measured. "But legally, the situation is quite clear. Since your wife was already legally married to Michael Miller and never finalized that divorce, your marriage to her is null and void. It's as if it never existed." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. It's as if it never existed. 15 years of my life erased. Our home, our shared assets, our memories, all of it was legally meaningless. I had no claim to anything. I was a ghost, a legal phantom. The lawyer explained my options, which were, to put it mildly, limited. I could sue for fraud, but it would be a long, expensive, and emotionally draining battle with no guarantee of success. Or I could walk away. I could cut my losses and start over, from scratch. The choice was clear. I didn't want to fight her in court. I didn't want her money. I just wanted out. I went back to the house, not to talk to Jessica, but to pack my things. The atmosphere was still tense, still thick with unspoken words. She watched me as I moved from room to room, packing my belongings into cardboard boxes. She didn't try to stop me, didn't try to talk to me. She just watched, her eyes a mixture of fear and resignation. It was a strange, surreal experience, packing up the remnants of a life that had never been real. Every item I picked up, every book, every shirt, every photograph was a memory, a piece of a shared history that now felt tainted, fraudulent. As I was packing a box of old books in the study, I came across my own journal from college. I hadn't looked at it in years. I sat down on the floor and started to read, the words of a younger, more optimistic version of myself washing over me. I read about my dreams, my ambitions, my hopes for the future. I read about the person I wanted to be, the life I wanted to live. And as I read, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I had been so consumed by my life with Jessica, by my identity as her husband, that I had forgotten about myself. I had forgotten about the man I was before she came into my life. The journal was a reminder that I had my own story, my own identity, one that was separate from hers. And as I closed the journal and placed it carefully in a box, I made a promise to myself. I would find that man again. I would start over. I would build a new life, a real life, on my terms. On my last day in the house, the day the movers were scheduled to come, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something, a flicker of curiosity, made me swipe the screen. "Hello?" I said, my voice hesitant. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long, heavy silence. And then a man's voice, deep and hesitant, spoke. "Hello? My name is Michael Miller. I was given your number by a mutual acquaintance. I think we need to talk." The voice on the other end of the line was a ghost from a machine, a name from a document, a face from a photo. Michael Miller, the man who was, in the eyes of the law, my wife's real husband. The man who, in the eyes of her heart, was just as much a victim as I was. "I think we need to talk," he had said, and he was right. We did. We agreed to meet the next day at a neutral location, a park bench on a windswept hill overlooking the city. It was one of the strangest, most surreal moments of my life. I was about to meet the other half of a life I never knew I was sharing. He was already there when I arrived, sitting on the bench, his shoulders hunched against the wind. He looked just like he did in his photos, but older, more worn. His face was a mask of confusion and pain, a reflection of my own. I sat down next to him, and for a long time, we just sat in silence. Two strangers bound by a woman who had deceived us both. There was no anger between us, no animosity. There was only a shared sense of betrayal, a mutual understanding of the magnitude of the lie we had both been living. He spoke first, his voice rough with emotion. He told me his side of the story. He and Jessica had married young, right out of college. It had been passionate but volatile. They had fought a lot. He said she had left once before, about 15 years ago, saying she needed a clean start. He had been devastated, but he had waited for her. She had come back a few months later, apologetic and loving, and they had reconciled. He had never known about the divorce papers. He had never known about me. He talked about their life together, about the birth of their two children, Ethan and Olivia, about the family they had built. He thought her business trips were just that, business trips. He had no idea. He was just as much a ghost in her life as I was. As I listened to him, I felt a strange sense of kinship. We were two sides of the same broken coin. We were not rivals, we were allies, in a war we never knew we were fighting. We shared the details of our separate yet intertwined lives, filling in the gaps, piecing together the puzzle of her deception. It was a macabre, heartbreaking exercise, but it was also cathartic. For the first time, I wasn't alone in my knowledge. Someone else understood. Someone else shared my pain. The meeting wasn't about revenge or about pointing fingers. It was about closure. We were both victims of a master manipulator, and our only path forward was to support each other in the aftermath. We parted ways with a silent understanding, a shared promise to move on, to rebuild our lives. As I walked away from the park bench, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was no longer just a character in Jessica's story. I was the protagonist of my own. Months have passed now. I live in a new city, in a small one-bedroom apartment that I've filled with my own things. It's quiet, sometimes, but it's a peaceful quiet. It's the sound of a life that is mine and mine alone. I'm rebuilding, one day at a time. I've reconnected with old friends, started a new job, and even started dating again, cautiously. I'm finding my way back to the man I was before Jessica, the man I read about in my old journal. Sometimes I think about her, about Michael, and about the 2 children who are caught in the middle of it all. I hope they find peace. I hope they can heal. My life with her feels like a dream now, a strange, vivid dream that I finally woke up from. The other day, I was scrolling through the news on my laptop, and I saw a small article from a newspaper in Oregon. It was a brief report about a local woman arrested for bigamy. Her name was Jessica Miller. I stared at her picture for a long time, at the face of the woman I had once loved, the woman who had been my entire world. Then I closed my laptop, walked over to the window, and looked out at my new view. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was a beautiful view. It was the view from the beginning of the rest of my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely free.